expression,
Williamina
how the
White.
face was knitted into a frown or something. His face really does knit into that expression.
Did you bring
just wondering
is
whether
the
he's
other
gonna
dog
get me
through
one.
there?
Yeah, he's having a drink.
Come on,
What
Dickie.
happened about your chilblains then?
The doctor used to come and have a look at them, and
Dexter!
they were supposed to treat. They did them for me each day, you see.
Jackie!
But they used to be stick. They used to stick, you know. They to put the thingy on, and then they put lint, and then the bandages. But each day when they were done, they were stuck. You know, with the bleeding of them.
How old were you then?
I was anything from, I should say, 10 to 14 when they were very bad, at their worst. And of course, they'd look at them and they'd see, and what they'd do is wrench it off. And of course the skin, whatever they were growing, they pulled the top off every time, you see, and then get a new dressing, and the next day they'd be...
Was that woman again?
Miss Hodges, yes. You can still see the marks on my feet there and here where I had them. And you know, I used to go to bed at night and I'd be moaning in bed, and Auntie Peggy was in the same dormitory as me. And she used to lie and cry because she knew what I was going through. She knew that it was as much I could do as to keep myself quiet. Because you didn't call out if you were in pain. Because there was a big
Well, what would they do?
There was a dormitory that side and a dormitory that side, and there was a matron's bedroom was in between the two. She had a window where she could look into that dormitory, each dormitory. And if she heard anyone talking or anything like that, cool, you knew all about it. And we had one girl there, her name was Margaret McPherson, and we used to call her Shockhead because she'd always be sitting up in bed and talking when Miss Hodges would look through and say, "Margaret McPherson, get to sleep," you know.
But why Shockhead?
We used to call her Shockhead because she always gave the matron a shock when you looked through, you see. And that girl, well, she was a nice girl, very quiet, and our father came from Oban somewhere, I think it was, and I don't think she had a mother. And she used to talk very nicely, and she was picked out in school to do a poem for the break-up of the school for the school holidays. And she was to do this poem. It was something about there were fairies at the bottom of our garden. I always know that because she was supposed to do it. And of course a couple of days or 3 days before she was due to do it, she got a big lump come out on her shoulder. And I remember I was up in the sick room once, and I used to say to one of the teachers name, what was her name? I forget her name now. But I used to say, I'd like to be a nurse when I grew up. You see, I'd like to, heal people's sores and that. Bandage them and make sure they were comfortable. And then a few days after that, Margaret McPherson, she died.
She died?
Must have been cancer or something like that was eating her. Something was eating her away. She had lovely black curly hair, and it was cropped short, nice and short. And I always felt, that she wasn't looked after properly.
How old was she?
I should say about 13, 14. And another girl we had there was now what was her name? Anyway, she had been a bit funny. She got into trouble over her work. Her work wasn't clean enough and that sort of thing. And we had ashes to clear out the fires, you know, if it was our week to do the fires, clean them out, carry all the ashes down and put them out by the ash pit out in the garden, which was a good way around the back. You had to go right round through the house and right out the back door and over to the ash pit, which was about 20 or 30 yards away, 50 yards maybe, can't remember now. But we used to take our ashes and you had to riddle them and save the ashes, you see, into your bucket again. And she had left her ashes without riddling them. And of course Miss Hodges saw that and called out who was the girl that left the ashes, you see, without riddling them. And I said, it was Bella Blakely, that was her name. Or was it Annie Blakely? Something like that. And that was her name anyway. She was called out. And you know what Miss Hodges did? She picked up the bucket of ashes and poured it over the girl's head. This is the honest truth. If God strike me dead, I'm telling the honest truth. She poured them over the girl's head. And you can imagine what the girl would do. She'd do, wouldn't she? She'd take a breath and would go up her nose and into her mouth and into her lungs and everything. And she was taken away to the madhouse shortly after.
And died.
Well, we never heard any more about her. We take it she died because she never came back. Was it or Bella Blakely or Annie? I can't remember.
Was Auntie Peggy still there then?
Auntie Peggy was still there as well. And I'll tell you what, half a dozen of us, we'd scrumped some apples that were on the ground. And it was in our own orchards. And you weren't allowed to touch them. They'd rot rather than give them to the kids. Anyway, we thought we'll run and get a couple of apples. So 3 or 4 of us ran in and got them. I don't remember running in, but I must have been among them, running in getting the apples. And somebody saw us, or Miss Hodges saw us from her sitting room window. She could see, you see, and she could see into the orchards. I think she could see it. She could always see wherever we were. She'd see us. Whatever we did, she'd see us. Anyway, we scrumped those apples. There was about 8 of us, and we scrumped those apples. And this girl, Lizzie Stevenson, we were all in for it, you see, we're all going to be punished. So we were big girls by then, we were about 14, 15. And what she'd do with us, she'd call you all in, and she'd take your knickers down in front of the whole class, kids and everything, and take her slipper and thrash you across the bottom with her slipper on your bare bottom. And that was to make you feel ashamed. So what we all decided to do was to run away. About 8 of us decided we'd run away, so we all got prepared to that. And one morning, early I think it was, this girl said she lived in Trinent. No, it's close to Preston Pans, you see. She said, well, if I can get us to Trinent, there's a burn runs along there, and my parents live there, so if we need any food, we'll get it from them. And so we all decided we'd run away. And at the that side of the school, from the back door, there was the big draw up for cars at the front door, and then beyond the cars there was a dip, and the milkman and all them used to come up, or delivery men used to come with stuff to the school. That was just below this, and there was a wall there, and we all thought we could run along there and keep our heads down. If we kept our heads down, nobody would see us running away. Anyway, we all did that, and we just got out the gate when, of course, somebody had seen us and had come chasing after us, all picked up. We were all sent to bed, no tea, no nothing to eat at all, sent to bed. And got a good thrashing, sent to bed. And Auntie Peggy, she was one of the eldest in the thing, I think she was. Anyway, she was sent to she was shut in a bathroom. We had a bathroom with 4 baths, a big room with 1, 2 and 2 cubicles. That's where we bathed. So the 2 cubicles, you could be shut in one and you could lock the door and that. Locked from the outside or inside, whichever you wanted to. You weren't allowed to lock yourself in. But Auntie Peggy was shut in the one. And she was in there for a fortnight, believe it or not, and fed on bread and water. And if Auntie Peggy had only had something she could stand on, she'd have climbed out the window. She said she'd have killed herself, because if she could have got out the window and dropped, she'd have dropped right down into what we call the basement. What we used to call was, I forget what we used to call it then, but she'd have dropped right down into there in a narrow, quite a narrow space, a wall with quite a drop in it. She'd have dropped in there into that and then killed herself.
I thought that was because of the letter.
Because she had written a letter to tell Auntie Helen and Uncle Robert, if she could, what was happening and how we were being treated. Us Robertsons were the most horrible kids in the school, and you know, I swear we did nothing wrong. We were picked on every minute. She picked on us from morning till night, Miss Hodges did. The Robertsons.
And yet, didn't your mother make her things?
My mother used to be in the hospital in bed where she couldn't get about and she couldn't move in bed. She was bedridden. She used to crochet all sorts of nice things for her home should she get married or anything like that, you see.
How old was Miss Hodges?
And send them to Miss Hodges. Well, we thought she was old. She was maybe just about 40. You see? Maybe 40, 45. Maybe up to 50. You can't tell, you see, when you're kids like that. And anyway, Peggy was up there, and she was up there for a fortnight, and that was that. And Miss Hodges, naturally, she'd give us all showing us all up in front of the kids by a shoe slipper on you behind. And then she'd send you to bed, and of course we were all kept away from the other girls for so long.
Just the Robertsons?
No, not just the Robertsons, the whole 8 of us that did this, tried to run away. And that was that. And when we went to bathing, there was a bathing day, was every Friday. We'd have a bathing day. So you'd bath, and there was a big bathroom, a big toilet place where you cleaned your teeth, brushed your hair, and washed yourselves. There was about a dozen basins, you know. and your toothbrushes and all your flannels and towels hung up on your pegs. I was number 14, Peggy was 16, and Dora, I think, was 20. Dora was 16, and Peggy was number 26. I always remember those numbers. And that was that. But you'd have to strip in the bathroom, and you'd stand naked in the bathroom until your name was called to go into for your bath. And you know, to spite us bigger ones, you know, when you're growing bigger, you're beginning to show. And she'd shove you in with a couple of kids if she didn't like you. Shove you in with a kid, you know, in the same bath as one of the maybe 7 or 8 year olds. That's what she was like. And in the mornings at breakfast time, she'd stand there and she'd do this with her bosoms and that. She said, keep yourselves up to the gills. And of course, we were all beginning to grow up top, you see. And she'd say, keep yourselves up, you're supposed to have bosoms like little pudding balls. And she'd be doing this all the time to herself. You should have breasts like little pudding balls. That, if I never moved from here, I'm telling you the honest truth. Should have breasts like little pudding balls and that sort of thing. And how could she expect us to keep ourselves up straight when she was showing us off in front of all the tiny little tots? You know, making us stand naked in front of them. So we used to have what you call liberty bodices. There was no bust thing then. We had a liberty bodice that just came over like a vest, and you had to button it down the front. So what we used to have to do to keep our breasts from growing was absolutely press them down flat. And we pulled our liberty bodice over to the one side, and we'd pin it here with big safety pins, get them from the shop, and pin them right down there with big safety pins to keep that side flat. And then we'd pull the other side that was supposed to just fit, they were supposed to just fit us to there, pull that side right over there, and we'd pin them down with big safety pins as well. And you wonder why we grew hanging busts. That's why we're, you know, all with loose busts. We never weren't allowed to grow like normal people, except her favourites. There was 2 or 3 girls like, her name was Little Isle, and another name was Nanny Connon, and, you know, a few like that. And they were usually blondes, plenty of hair and blondes, and quite nice looking girls they were, really. And they were always treated the best. And they didn't need malt and cod liver oil according to the doctor. They weren't told they had to have it. But she said, oh, you go along and join the queue for your cod liver oil and malt. These girls had to have the cod liver oil and malt.
How were they treated differently?
They never got told off. They didn't do anything wrong. And that's what made us so conscious of ourselves. Peggy, Dora and I, you weren't allowed to speak unless you were spoken to. You were afraid to speak because you might have said something and been caught opening your mouth, and that was that.
What did the other girls that were favourites get, that were favours, that you didn't
They
get?
couldn't get anything else but
Did they go and have tea with her or something?
no, they couldn't do that sort of thing, no. And yet when it came that we were old enough to, I was old enough to do the work and things like, you know, elder girls things, I was always given maybe a course on the in the dining room, which meant you did all the dining room work. I was given a course with her in her sitting room, which you did the sitting room, and everything had to be done perfect. You know, you mustn't find a bit of dust anywhere or anything like that. The dining room and the sitting room, and then I was given the kitchen, and when one of the teachers was sick, I was the head girl then, and I was given a teacher's job. I was the cook. So I think that's maybe why I took up cooking, you see. I was given the cook's job because the cook was off ill, and her name was Miss Stoddart. And Miss Stoddart liked me too. You know, she knew, I think she understood how we were being treated, you know, which was unfair. And I had to do all the measuring of all the foods for all the kids. Everything from great big things, almost as big as that, you'd have to dip in and get your, say, porridge oats or lentils or rice or whatever was wanted. And the meat would come by the butchers and the milk would come, everything like that. Had to do all that and see to the porridge, all the porridge in the morning for all the breakfasts, and get all the mince and liver and everything. No many potatoes to put on that. I used to do all that. And in fact, when one of the Miss Stoddart left to get married, they hadn't got a teacher to put in. No, I left the job. I got to 17, that's right. No, I got to 16 and it's time to leave the school. So they found me a job. I left the school at 16 and for a job, you see, we had to leave the school at 16 and
You went to an MP or something?
I went to an MP's, it was Colonel Cruikshank, that's the MP's name. And
Galashiels or something?
Black Shields, I think it was, or Galashiels, one of the two. And I didn't stay there very long because I couldn't stand the cook. Every other word was swear word.
She swore.
So I said, when the school asked me how I was getting on and that sort of thing, I said I couldn't stand the cook. I wanted to leave. I couldn't stand the cook anymore. Every other word was swear and never being used to swear words. I mean, I felt awful.
What was the MP like?
The
Did you
MP,
meet
oh
him?
well, you never met them because they were the big knobs, a great big house. It was about 10 or 11 servants. And then they said, well, would you like to come back to the school? So I thought, well, anything's better than being here with this cook. I just couldn't stand it. So I went back to the school. And they said, well, one of our teachers, our thing was getting married. That was Miss Stoddart. She was the cook.
One that liked you?
One, yeah. Well, she was getting married to a Mr. Forget his name. I'll think of it. Anyway, she was getting married. And I said, yes, I'd come back for a while. And while I was there and did all that she used to do, they asked me if I'd like to stay. They did, that's the honest truth. They asked me if I'd like to take on a job and stay and do the job. And I thought better of it. I thought, no, better not.
Why?
I'll look for another job. So they found me another job in Edinburgh somewhere. I was all right in that little job in Edinburgh. It
What
was
was it?
general servant, that was.
Where?
And where was the place? It was away up there to the bridges. You go over the bridges where Patrick Thompson's and them were. Right up there into Normington. Normington. And it was Hans Crescent.
Do you know the name of the family?
15 Hans Crescent. Normington. Edinburgh. The name of the family was now they had 2 sons and 2 daughters, Hamish and Alexander, and Mary and Eileen. What was her name now? Isn't it funny how the name...
Remember the Christian names and not the
Yes, I
same.
remember all the Christian names. And I think I stayed there a couple of years until Mary got in touch with me and she said she thought, and Dora had left school by then, and Mary said, what about going down to England, try and getting a job down in England. So we did try to get a job in England, got a job and came down on the Flying Scot.
What was your job?
I went as a cook, I think.
Where?
A cook general in a little job. Where was that? Oh, just can't remember.
Was it
now.
London?
Somewhere in London, yes.
How old were you then?
Must have been about 18. 18. I was 18 when I came down to England.
But you don't remember what
Because I went back to the school and I was 17 and then I left, you see, and went to this job in Scotland, you know, with
BMP.
with Hamish and them. No,
Oh, in Edinburgh.
in Edinburgh.
So what about your first job? How long were you there? In
I
London?
think I only stayed about 18 months in Edinburgh with this woman.
No, when you went to London.
When I went to London,
Didn't you stand on a street or something and somebody came and said something could you...
I went to I took a job in a doctor's house, yes, that's right. And I remember when I took this job in the doctor's house, well, that was a long time after, that was shortly before I married George. I went to this doctor's house, and that's where I got rid of all my chilblains. As he said, you mustn't do so and so, and you mustn't do so and so, and I got rid of all my chilblains there. And I remember Auntie Peggy came and took a job with me. I was the cook and Peggy was the housekeeper in this doctor's house, and there was another girl there. And I remember I fell one day up against the hot water boiler was on and the chimney went up, you know, just a big round chimney went straight up the fireplace. And I fell up against it. I've got an awful burn there. I've got a big burn on my arm. I believe the marks must be still there somewhere. Got a big burn there. And the doctor sorted it and everything, you see, and he said about my chilblains, got rid of my chilblains. And then from there I remember going to the station one day and I met this fella I told you, asked me if I'd marry him, you see. I only met him the once, and he said he was a married man and he was divorcing his wife. And it was Whitsun it was Whitsun time. So he said that I went out on my day off, that was I think Friday. And we went on the river, I think it was on the Thames. Went down the river on a boat. And then he asked me if I'd marry him, if I would marry him if he got his divorce. And when I went back and told Auntie Peggy that I'd met this nice fellow, oh, he was a porter on the station, that's right. At porter on the station at, where was it? Where did they play cricket in London?
The Oval?
Up there somewhere.
Or Lord's?
At Lord's, somewhere up there. And so I said, you know, I couldn't make my mind up if I was going to see him again. He said, would I see him on the Sunday? That was on the Friday, would I see him on the Sunday? That was my next day off. When I got back at night into the flat and I told Auntie Peggy, we went up to, our bedrooms were on the top of the house, you see. So I told Auntie Peggy that I'd met this ever such a nice fellow at the station. No, I saw him a couple of times, that's right, before he asked me out. Asked me to meet him on the Sunday. And I told Auntie Peggy, she said, you're not going to see him again. Oh yes, I said, I'm going out to see him again. I shall see him anyway, whether it was to say I wouldn't see him again or what it was. Anyway, Auntie Peggy was that mad. We used to wash up in our bedrooms, you see, we had got a jug and your basin of water. And of course it was cold water in the yard. So she said, you're not going to see him again. I said, I'll please myself whether I see him again. I said, he's ever such a nice fellow. I said, I'll please myself whether I see him again. And she got this jug of water and poured it on my head.
Cold water.
Oh dear, cold water. Oh dear, Peggy.
She was right there.
Peggy was an awful one. She was the one in the family with long, strong nails. And all the times, many a times, Peggy scratched me sore. And she had a bit of a temper, Peggy did. I would just be placid and say what I was going to do, and
You
I
were
wouldn't
stubborn.
think to fight. I wouldn't have fought.
No, but you were
Anyway, she poured this water over me. And of course when Sunday came, I did go out, and I think I must have told him I wouldn't see him again. And I didn't go out with him anymore, you see, because I thought, well, the best thing, if he's a married man, is going to, and Peggy said, you know, if he's got kids, you know, you're breaking up someone else's family. And of course I didn't do that. I don't ever remember even kissing him, the fella. And
Did you want
but-
to there?
eh?
Did you want to?
I can't remember.
Was he
Can't
handsome?
remember.
What did he look like?
Rather nice. He was on the plump side, like your dad might have been.
Big, you mean?
Yes, fairly plump.
Strong looking.
Being a railway porter, you see. And anyway, that was that part of my existence. Then after that I went to a job in Hans Place in London.
Wasn't it Hans Crescent in Edinburgh as well?
Hans Place and George was in Hans Crescent. That's when I met George, you see. I used to be cleaning the doorstep and cleaning the bell at the front door and getting all the brasses on the front place clean and the steps nice and white. It used to be have to be done every day in London. And me being a servant there, and George once or twice came by and he saw me. And I don't know how I met George. I don't know how we met. Must have been through somebody, you know.
I bet he prearranged it.
Yeah. And Mr. Bear, the foot, I think Mr. Bear, the footman, the butler told George, the nice girl round the corner, she works at number 2. I reckon he said, nice girl at the corner, I always see her doing the steps. She seemed a nice girl, George. You ought to see if you can get in touch with her. But anyway, somehow or other I got to know George. Oh, I'll tell you what happened. The Americans came over from America. The new president had got in, President, whatever his name was, I can't remember it just now, but it would come back to me. He got in America, and of course the people came and lived in where did they live now? They lived in Elphinston Gardens, I think it was, some big flat, big houses in around about the same district. And I put in for a job as kitchen maid there, first kitchen maid. There was 3 in the kitchen. And George put in as footman, first footman there. And there was George, there was the butler and George and another footman under him. And that was in the American Embassy. So George put in for that job and I put in for the other job. And we both went to that great big hotel in...
Near Harrods.
Yes. Yes, up there.
Knightsbridge, was it?
Knightsbridge. Knightsbridge Hotel, that great big fairy-like hotel. It got a lot of these...
Turrets.
Turrets. We both went for that job, and of course I met George then. And we both got the job. You see, George ended up as the footman and I ended up as the kitchen maid. I didn't meet him till I turned up at he had been after the job the same day as I had, and he'd got his job and I'd got mine. So we had to start on a certain day. So George had started before me, and I took a taxi from the job I was already in Hans Place, and I came to this other address, got out the taxi and that, and of course was my great big trunk.
What were you wearing?
Eh?
What were you wearing?
A red coat. I'd got a lovely red coat with buttons across here, 3 buttons across here, and fitting coat, you see, and looked like a guardsman's coat. It was ever so nice. I fancied myself in that. And of course George came down to the back. I rang the bell and George came to the back door and he said, "Oh gosh," he said, "now I've got to carry that up to the top of the house." No, that's what he said. So anyway, he had to carry it up.
Is that the first thing he ever said to you?
Yeah, and I've got to carry that up to the top of the house. And then of course you're sort of thrown together then, you see. Butler and kitchen footman and kitchen maid, because so much of your jobs are intertwined, you see, with what they have to do and what you have to do and what you have to tell them, what's on the menu and things like that. It's all sort of, it's all connected, kitchen and the butler. They're all connected with each other. And with a housemaid as well, she took a fancy to George.
I bet you didn't like that.
And of course George took a fancy to me. And this girl, one day she fell down the stairs, pretended she had fainted down the stairs so that George could pick her up, you see. So George guessed what happened. And
What did he do?
and anyway, that's how we got together, George and I. And the things just carried on from there.
What was your first date then?
Eh?
What was your first date? The first time you went out.
First time I went out with George.
What did he say?
Oh, I can't remember. Well, we used to go swimming. He'd go swimming, and I'd go rowing.
No, you were a good rower.
I used to row on the Thames, on the Serpentine, you see, out in a skiff. And George took me around to the skiff the first day, and he said to the man, of course you didn't have trousers in those days, and he said, oh, you're supposed to have trousers, and George said, well, I'm not allowed to wear trousers in our job. So he said, well, tuck your things in so that you don't get caught in the rowlocks, you see, because as the things go back, or your feet are going backwards and forwards, you see, you could get your clothes caught up in them, could tip you over. Anyway, I got confidence with George. He'd go in for a swim while I was having a row, and I got my confidence that way, and I was quite a good rower. I was a good rower. I'd go along there with the skiffs as easy as anything, you know, just skim me across the top of the water. So, you know, I'd got my wrists and everything just right. I used to fancy myself doing that. And then that was when the family went up to Scotland, you see. They went to Scotland for the summer. The
Family you worked for?
the family who worked for the Americans and that. Most big families went up to Scotland and took holidays in Scotland for the summer. You know, the grouse shooting and all that sort of thing. And they used to pay us a standing wage, and so much money for our food. We could feed ourselves and have our wage at the same time. And you could buy what you like and get the kitchen to cook it for you, whatever you wanted. We got on all right like that, the whole lot of our servants. There was about
You
eight
mean
or
back
nine.
in London? You stayed back in
Eight
London?
or nine of us. We stayed back in London, you see. Being Americans, they didn't have a house in Scotland, so they were asked.
Somewhere else.
They were asked out, you see, out to Scotland as visitors, as friends. Being in the American embassy. And then when they left, they gave us good references, George and I, and they said if we wanted to go to America, there was always a job there for us if we wanted to go.
How long did you work for them?
Must have been about 2 years. That was the length of time they were there. Now I can't remember the name of the man's name. I must have the references somewhere.
They're the people that gave you the magic lantern.
No, yes, the butler. Let me think. The butler gave us a magic lantern. No, that was the Whitbreads, the people from Whitbreads. George used to work for Whitbreads before he took this job, you see. Francis Pelham Whitbread, that was the name of the people. And when I got married and we had you kids, we took you all up to London and we saw Mr. Whitbread, took you around to Whitbread's, that big house there, and showed you off and that, and they thought you were lovely, 3 of you. You were only tiny tots. And he said, oh George, I've got the very thing for you. It was lovely for the kids to show them. The magic lantern. You know the magic lantern, girl? That was George Pelham Whitbread's that was the old man's, and it was bought when the kids were born. Kids were tiny tots. Helen, you and Rose.
Yeah. So, if we were, if Helen and I were what, 18 months?
Yeah.
And how old were his children then?
Francis Pelham Whitbread's was about too old to have the magic lantern. It had been up in the loft for years.
So about 20 years.
Must have been.
So, about 1915,
Uh-huh.
that magic lantern.
Must have
When
been.
they got it, and it presumed it could have been.
Must have
older
been,
then.
yes. And
So then, I mean, where were you living then with 3 children and Dad?
when we left, the Americans went back to America because the president was changed.
Was that before you were married?
That was before we were married, yes.
Did you have to give your notice in to get married or
Eh?
something? You couldn't have your job and be married, could you, or something?
George had to give no, we left there. George went to the palace. He went to, with the Duke of
Clarence.
Clarence. And who did I go to? I went to Lady.
No.
Who did I go to? A late lady somebody, and
When did you get out of service?
Lady.
When-
did
When did Dad get out of service?
Well, George left service when I'll tell you, George went to the Duke's place, and I went to Lady somebody's in Hans Place, Hans Crescent in London. And straight away from there, they were going down and taking a summer place in the summer thing. I'd been there about 2-3 months when he gave me an extra rise. He said, "I'm going to raise your wages, Minnie, Mrs. Robertson." I was called then because there was a butler in the house, and the cook was always called Mrs. So I was called Mrs. Robertson. And he said, we're going down to the country for the summer. We took a place down near Guildford for the summer. And he said, I'm very pleased with how you're cooking, how you're doing in the house. I'm raising your wages. So he gave me an extra rise in wages. And he said, you're doing very well in that, and you're keeping the bills down. He was pleased about that because I was afraid to go over too much spending. And honestly, I used to spend, and I used to get no end of shopping in things I didn't really need, and I used to pack them in a big box, and I used to ring Morley up and say, "I'll meet you at the station. On my half day, I'll meet you at the station." I used to give them this box of stuff to take home to Auntie Helen. Soaps and bovrils and all things like that, Auntie Helen was ever so pleased, I used to give her all those sort of things to...
Never heard that from Auntie Helen.
Eh?
I never heard that from Auntie
No,
Helen.
that's honest truth. That's honest truth.
When was it that this business about Dad and his shoes in the oven and that?
Oh, that was I'll tell you, now after this where was I about now?
Well, after the
people
magic
into the
lantern.
Oh yes, after the magic lantern. Oh yes, I had been in this lady's house for so long, and George had gone to the palace. Well, in the palace they wanted George to go to, as long as I'd been in my digs, George had been in the palace, and he used to come round and see me practically every night. He was off, he'd be around to the house to see me, and when he got home he'd sit and write pages and pages of letters, tiny little writing. And imagine me with all my work to do as a cook, housekeeper, and sitting and reading these letters. I had those letters for years and years and years, right up till the war started. We used to sit and read them all and get
Shame
rid
you
of
didn't
them.
keep them.
Eh?
It's a shame you didn't keep them.
No, we used to sit and read them and burn them. We didn't want, if the bombs went up, you see, we didn't want your letters lying all over the place. Anyway, I'm back to where I was again. George, they wanted him to go to France with the family. And he said, Minnie, he says, if I go to France, you bet your life I'll not want to come back, going to France. And he said, I don't want to stay away. So he said, either we get married or something like that, and go and I'll get a job outside. And then we saw, there. You see, George got impatient, he wanted sex and things like that, and that's how it happened. I fell for Rose. I was still in my job, and I stayed in my job till it was 6 months. And the people round the corner, no one guessed I was expecting. It was right up to 6 months when I left my job. George had gone to Barking because Sid Brown promised George a job. And he said, if you leave the palace and that, you can come and I'll put your name down for this job, and the next job that comes up, you can have it. And it was a job, and it was to be a job as a tallyman in the factory. And the tallyman just checks everything as it goes in and out the factory, you know. Like you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you put a cross, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you cross all the stuff as it goes in and out, because it was Guiana Works and all that, you know, that Sid Brown worked at. He was in the offices. He said he could get George a job. So George, I carried on my job for 6 months, and then George went home and he took a job in the selling radios for one of the men in Hemel Hempstead, and he was doing that, and I was in my job, and of course the time was getting on, and he kept writing to Sid Brown, because Sid Brown said, if you leave in time for November, that's when we take most of our men on. So George left, gave up his job in the palace, went to Barking, got a job, got digs there in Barking, a rotten old place it was. Mixed with some of the worst men, you know, all sorts of men there, factory men. And he worked there, and
Job Sid Brown got him.
And he used to have to go down every morning, wait for a job, and if there was no jobs they had to go back to the digs. And I was still in my job in London, and then, no, that was after he'd given up his job in the shop, yeah. He went to London, to Barking, waiting for this job to come up that Sid Brown promised him. And we went right on till March, I think, or May. Well, Auntie Mary at the same time, she was wanting a baby, you see. So she said, Minnie, if I have a baby, will you come and look after me? And I had promised her, I said, yes, I'll come and look after you if you're having a baby and see to you, see. So she didn't want to go in hospital. And so that was that. I had made arrangements that I'd look after her and her baby. But I didn't know I was going to have one of my own. And I was 6 weeks from having Rose. And George got the job in the factory. And I came down. George got me a couple of rooms in this place in Barking. There's a lovely big room upstairs, great big bedroom with the one great big window that, you know, one of those big bay windows, and another big window at the side. So that was one bedroom we had up there. And it got us another bedroom and a sitting room downstairs where we ate and sat on that, and I used to cook the dinner on a tiny little open fire. You'd be surprised the dinners I cooked on that little open fire. I can't believe it myself. But anyway, I did that. And our dining room table was new, and our chairs were second hand, and our bed was new, but our wardrobe and everything else was second hand, you see. And George had, when I went down, when I arrived at the house, George had got it lovely. He'd got lovely new curtains and everything, got them made for him. I remember the picture of them now, the big green, there was sort of a greenish mixture with lovely flowers on it, and the green and the red flowers. Oh, I remember that. I can see it in my mind's eye now. Lovely. And we lived there, and that was a midwife's house. You see, we'd taken those 2 rooms in this house.
What about this job?
Eh?
What about this job?
And George actually got the job in the end. But it was just howking great big barrel loads, 200-300 weights of guana, and you had to run them from the boat down the thing and into the factory and up another ramp and tip the barrow so that the guana fell into a big machine that went spinning it around for making manure. That's it, guana.
Why didn't you get the office job that he was promised?
He never got. Sid Brown. Sid Brown. That's George told him what he thought of him, because he knew he'd promised him. Sid Brown promised George that job, and somebody else comes along and gets a job, and George is left with the blooming factory among all those old types that he met there. And anyway, by that time I was well on the way to having Rose.
What about these shoes then?
Eh?
What about these shoes?
I was
When was
sitting,
that?
oh yes, and then George got a job in the swimming pools after that. When he was after, you know, it was only a temporary job too, at the thing. And then he left. Why did he leave that job? The Guiana job. Anyway, it was so many were taken on each day. No, why did he give up that job? Or there was not enough work or something happened. And George used to come home and he had no skin on. Tell you, he had no skin on the middle of his hands for pushing those barrows. That's how hard that job was. And the smell, ooh. Anyway, we put in Rosewood. We took from that house we were in, we went to another place No, Auntie Dora. Auntie Dora got herself a married man and she expected June. Who would have Auntie Dora and who would have June? Auntie Dora. Was Minnie and George. Can you take Auntie Dora in your house with you? So there we were left with Auntie Dora.
And Auntie
Come and
Mary
stay
to
with
look
us.
after you. You had to look after Auntie Mary as well.
Oh yes, I'll tell you about that. So Auntie Dora came and stayed with us. In the meantime, when I was 6 weeks towards having the baby, when Auntie Mary suddenly said, Minnie, you know, having the baby, you have to come and stay with us. So I had to leave George at home and go and stay with Auntie Mary and sleep there.
But why did you have to?
That's what Sid said, we can't have George coming with Minnie. If George comes, I don't know, he was afraid he might be caught for income tax or something, or have to pay me something for looking after the baby. It was something to do with money that he didn't want to come. And he had to he told George that if his wife came and stayed with him and looked after her sister to have the baby, George, when he went, George became unemployed. Yes, it was must have been when there was slack at work or something down at Bicton Gasworks. George had stopped work and he had to go and sign on the dole. That's right. Yes, so I can remember, you know, I'm going back years and years. George had to sign on the dole because he was out of work again. And Sid Brown said to him, now you must tell them that your wife is looking after her sister while she's having a baby. Otherwise, George couldn't claim for me. He says, you won't be able to claim for Minnie on the dole. That was daft, really. We had no need to do that sort of thing. But that's what he told George he had to do. And of course, George had to say that his wife was looking after his sister and that, and he'd lose some benefit.
And Uncle Sid gained, I expect.
Yeah, and then Sid Brown said, well, and you can't come and stay with Minnie, you know. George and I could easily have stayed at Auntie Mary's.
But I don't know why you accepted that situation.
We were daft.
What about these shoes, anyway?
Anyway, the thing with Mary and Sid Brown said, you can't stay with Minnie, you can't sleep with Minnie while she's looking after Mary. So I don't want you to sleep. So George used to come over and Sid Brown would keep George playing cards at night while I was looking after Mary, you see, and he wouldn't let George stay the night. He had to go home. If it was 12 or 1 o'clock, he had to go right back to Marking on his bike. That's the honest truth. He wouldn't let George stay in the house with me while I was looking after
I wish
Mary.
I'd known. I'd have told Uncle Sid.
And I was only 6 months from having the baby.
6 weeks.
6 weeks from having the baby. And anyway, I had the baby and that sort of thing, and that was that. Mary was daft to marry him anyway. I don't know what she married him for, really. But anyway, she didn't marry him. That's that. And then after the baby, and then after 6 weeks, you see, I had my own baby. And George went to work at Beckton, at the Beckton Gasworks, because there were no other jobs to take. You see, he had to take a job. And he worked at Beckton Gasworks, and that was a hard job as well. He was absolutely pouring with sweat and wringing wet his clothes. Yeah, I had to make him a couple of vests that had to be flannel, you see. Not flannelette or anything, they had to be flannel, because you get absolutely pouring wet with sweat, and the sweat would run down your trousers and into your Wellingtons, and your boots would be full of water. You could George said, you take your Wellingtons off, pour them in the water onto the hot coals, as they used to pull the fires out in the coke ovens, be working on the coke ovens with great long things and pull all the boiling hot coke out, right from the number of the ovens were 2, 4 and 6 high or something. That's how they spoke about them. Eyes, they called them. So that they all had to be cleaned out, and of course red hot tar and red hot coke would come out and fall into the water and be washed away all the time. The boiling hot water was running down in front of them all the time. While they were pouring all this down, it was dropping in front of them into this water. And once or twice he did get his eyelashes practically stuck together with the hot tar as it fell.
What about the shoes?
And the shoes, oh yes, it'd been down there anyway. It was a slack time, it was winter time, and he thought he'd put in for a job at the Motorworks, Ford Motorworks in Dagenham. So he'd cycle over there to Dagenham and put in for a job, and he'd stand there for hours and hours and hours, stand there, and